Hey everyone, it's Lisa from Down to Earth Gardening, and today we've got some fall vibes going on. It's fall, we're kind of on the cusp of winter here, but one of the big questions that we get this time of year is what are the basics of a fall garden cleanup? So I just wanted to bring you back here to this beautiful garden that we installed and just show you how we're going to put things to bed here and just give you some basic tips and do a quick little walkthrough. I've got the Down to Earth gardening team here and they're going to do a little cleanup as I talk, so you'll get to see them in action. So our gardens typically have a mix of annuals, perennials, deciduous shrubs, and evergreens. And we like to do the combinations because what it does is it extends the seasonal interest, but it's also much more visibly pleasing. This way, you're going to get lots of textures and flowers in the mix, but it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I'm just going to try to give you quick tips and really just break it down for you. So this garden here doesn't have any annuals, but if it did, that would be the first thing that we would pull out. After we get some hard frost, they just die back brown and they're ready just to be pulled out. So we would discard those. And then we start looking at our perennials, and there's a really nice mix of them here. But it's important with perennials just to know a little bit about them and to wait until you do get a couple of hard frosts and they die back. So when they die back, they're going to be brown and crispy, and this is a perfect example right here. This is a peony. So once you see that happening with your perennials and herbaceous plants, then you know that it's okay to go ahead and cut them right down to the ground. So we like to wait until that happens because when they're still green, they're still storing energy for next year's leaves and flowers. So the perennials here that we are going to cut back, I'm just going to start at the end here and show you is anything that's died back. So the peony is definitely one of them. And for that plant, you really want to be sure that you cut it right down to the ground. So we have another example that's caged at the end here. So the astilbe they're also going to work on. It's pretty crispy and it's time to go ahead and cut that down. But there are a couple of perennials in this garden that are going to provide the winter interest. And one of those is lorope. I've talked about lorope in some of my other videos because it's a really pretty variegated plant, a nice texture, and it will get a purple flower. But that is considered an evergreen perennial in our zone here, which again is 6A. And then we're also going to leave some of the heuchera or the coral bells. They're pretty vibrant. They will tend to pop back a little bit when the weather's cooler, and you can just see how vibrant and the pretty colors are here. Okay, the crew's going to get started now that I've pointed out a couple of things. So we do have, you can see some remnants of hostas here, and those had already been cut back. Now that's because we relocated them. They were from a different area in this garden. And so early fall when we did the planting, we cut them right down to make it easier to move them. And the crew's going to cut them down right to the ground now and really clean them up. I'm not concerned about cutting those down or having them cut down because hostas and daylily both are very resilient plants and they're not as fussy about when you cut them back. So the hostas there have been kind of taken care of and they're just going to work a little more on cleaning them up. And then we've got our coneflower here, and I always like to talk about this when I talk about fall cleanups because this is kind of optional. You can go ahead and cut this one right to the ground, but the other option is to leave these really fabulous cone heads for the birds, for food for the winter. And they do really look pretty. and provide a little bit of winter interest. So I always tell people that's kind of an optional plant. You know, you're not going to hurt it if you cut it back, but if you like it looking tidy, you may want to do that. So for this garden here, we're going to leave the cone heads. So let's see, the daylily. We have quite a few daylily in this garden, and I think we're going to go ahead and cut it back. And I know that I am going against what I just said about things dying back. But again, hosta, daylily, not as fussy. So we're going to go ahead and tidy them up, and they are surely going to come back. Not so worried about them. And then behind me here, I have a little bit of lavender called a woody perennial, and I like to leave the lavender alone this time of year, and so we will just lightly be trimming off the tips, the old flowers, and just a very light shaping right now. So we have more of the same for perennials on the other side. If you watch the video about the installation, we did a lot of the same on each side for some continuity. We do also have some sedum in the mix. That's another one that gets cut right down. It's already brown, crispy, so right down to the ground. We've got some catmint that's looking good, so we'll leave that, still taking up energy for next year. But next I want to move to some of the deciduous shrubs. So that's the next category that I want to talk a little bit about. So if you'll remember, we planted some clethra, we planted some different hydrangeas here. And these plantings are really not that old. So when it comes to the deciduous shrubs, all I'm doing is I'm looking at them for the shape and the health. And we're pretty much going to leave them alone. The Bobo hydrangea here, there's 3 in a row. They do have their crispy flower heads on them. And those are another optional plant. You can trim them if you don't like the look of them, or you can also leave them for the winter and trim them in the early spring. So that's another one that's up to you. You're not going to hurt it if you trim it back now. So Bobo hydrangea, we're actually going to leave those. And then the last category of shrubs that I wanted to talk about that we have here are the evergreens. So if you'll remember, we have a couple of evergreens in the mix just to provide some winter interest here. And we did just move those not too long ago. So it's important to really not do anything, you know, don't do a lot to shrubs if you just move them. But also with evergreens, it's not the time of year to prune them. The time of year is when you get some new growth, new nice growth on them in the spring. So right now is not the time to shape them. But again, what we will do is we'll go through, we'll look at the health of them. If there's anything, you know, dead or diseased, then we do remove them. But that's it. So pretty minimal. And then of course, the last thing that we're really doing here is we're just doing a quick weed, making sure, you know, our mulch looks nice. We do have a couple of roses in the bed. We pull up the mulch just a little bit more around the base of the roses just for a little protection. But that's it. You know, that's the fall cleanup basics. I will tell you there's a couple extra things that you can do if you'd like that are optional. And one is, since you're cutting your plants down right to the ground, you might want to go ahead and tag them so you'll remember next year when they start to come up. We have a design, a drawing for this garden here, so we do know where everything is located, but for you at home, you know, you may want to tag it just so it'll jog your memory next year. And then the other thing that you can do right now that's it's a really good time to do is do some soil testing, and you could do a little amending. And that way your garden is all ready for the spring to get going. So that's it for today, folks. I really hope you enjoyed the video. And again, if you liked it, tap like, and please join us again and hit subscribe for some future gardening videos with us.